So guys, we are continuing with our anesthesia. I think you guys have already noticed that sometimes I write anesthesia with the A and sometimes without the A. Doesn't matter, guys. Apparently this is between the European and the European and the Americans. You know, sometimes you write hemorrhage like this, and then someone else will come in and write hemorrhage like this. Doesn't really matter. Doesn't really matter. So don't be confused. I put an E, sometimes I put an A and an E. Doesn't really matter. So we said that anesthesia, the types of anesthesia, there is general, there is regional, there is procedural, sedation, and then there is I'll put local here, like I said. There is topical, and then there is infiltration, local infiltration. You know, when you do an infiltration, we do a lot of infiltration. You know, when we want to suture, we do a lot of infiltration. When you're infiltrating, you are not really targeting a nerve. You're just infiltrating around the wound with the hope that you catch nerve endings and that type of a thing. That's infiltration. But when you're infiltrating, trying to block a group of nerves or roots, that's when you're gonna get a regional anesthesia, right? Unlike when you're targeting nerve endings. And then there's topical, and then there's also so like we said that under regional you've got spinal, you have epidural, you have the combination of spinal and epidural, and then we said we also have peripheral nerve blocks. Right? And then we also spoke about what they call the MEC, which maybe I might talk about later, because even myself, I'm still haven't seen it, but it's something that is part of anesthesia. So it's worth knowing that there's something like that. So spinal, epidural. I wish you guys that you could sort of like take a picture of this and put it in your mind as a framework. This is an overview, and we did say that it's supposed to be here. We did say that with general anesthesia, we are gonna talk about general anesthesia later on, but what I want us to talk about is local anesthetics. If you draw a line here and take this guy out, for regional anesthesia, for local anesthesia, you use local anesthetics. Procedural sedation, you use IV drugs there, which are not local anesthetics. right? So we are going to talk about local anesthetics. When you talk about local anesthetics, you must know that under anesthesia, the places where you use local anesthetics is when you are doing regional. It can be this or this or this or that or even that. That's where you can use local anesthetics, right? So the drugs that we're going to be talking about, which are local anesthetics, are used under regional and under local. And we know that regional is spinal, epidural, combination of spinal epidural and peripheral nerve blocks, and also local anesthetics, right? Okay. This brings me to a bit of physiology, because what when I talk about here is local anesthetics, not local anesthesia, but local anesthetics, meaning the drugs. So let's talk about pain, not in detail obviously. So we have a nerve, a neuron rather, and it has got its cell body there and a nucleus. Right? And then we've got those endings there. So we all know that this is our neuron, this is our cell body. So the transmission of impulses move from this direction to this direction, and then you're going to find other neurons attached to this, taking the information or the action potentials from this cell body and transmit it further. So let's zoom into this area. This area has got a bilipid layer. Bilipid layer. So then it goes on like that to that other side. So we all remember that the ion that is abundant outside the cell is sodium, and the one that is abundant inside is potassium. Intracellularly is potassium. Now here you have sodium gates, which are proteins. These sodium channels, in order for an action potential to be generated and be transmitted, these sodium ions have got to come through this gate. They have to come through this gate. When they come inside that gate, they make the cell to be more positive, meaning they depolarize. They depolarize the cell. And that ensures that the action potential is generated plus transmitted, right? So what we know is that the influx of sodium into the cell through its channels or sodium gates is crucial for the action potential to be transmitted. If something happens and sodium cannot enter the cell, or this process does not take place, then it means that action potential will not be conducted, right? So number one, the influx of sodium is crucial for nerve impulses to be conducted. That influx causes a much needed depolarization of the cell. This is normal. This is what happens. If someone slaps me now in the face, that slap is gonna be, it's a complicated kind of the events are kind of complicated. I'm not gonna get into them now, but essentially that slap causes an action potential, and that action potential is transmitted, and this is what happens, so that the message that I've been slapped runs and get to the brain. Once it gets to the brain, I'm like, oh, I've been slapped. That slap was like hard. So it gets to the brain. But if there's an interruption and then this process does not take place, then that slap will not be registered to the brain. I don't want to get to the issue of the reflex arc and all those things now. But what is important is that we must understand that there is sodium that is outside the cell, that when there's an action potential that has been generated, it gets inside and then it's transmitted to the cell body and then to the brain. So this is an essential step to understand how local anesthetics work. Okay, so now what happens if you bring a local anesthetic on board? What's going to happen? Okay, let's say you give a patient a local anesthetic, LA, whatever LA you choose to give them. What that LA does, ELA or a local anesthetic is a weak base, and part of it exists in the ionized form and some of it in an unionized form, right? Now the unionized form is the one that when it's infiltrated around a nerve is gonna diffuse and get into this cell. It doesn't get through the sodium gate, it doesn't get through its own gate, it doesn't have a gate, it doesn't have a channel to get inside, so it diffuses. Why does it diffuse? First of all, the number one reason is that we're going to talk about it, but local anesthetics, they have a lipophilic or a lipophilic ring. Lipophilic. They have a lipophilic ring. That lipophilic ring, when you've got a high concentration of local anesthetic outside this cell, because of that lipophilicity, it's able to diffuse because of the differences in the concentration gradient, it gets inside because it's not lipophobic, it's lipophilic, so it's able to enter. The ones that are ionized, they've got a problem entering. The particles that are ionized, they've got a problem entering because, remember, this is also charged. The bilipid layer is also charged. So that's why the ionized does not make it inside, but the unionized gets inside. Now you have a local anesthetic that is inside the cell. I'm gonna have to use the green here. So now you've got a local anesthetic that is inside the cell now. What that local anesthetic does when it enters the cell, as soon as it enters the cell, it comes in here and blocks the sodium channel. When the sodium channel is blocked, now it means a sodium that is outside cannot get in. It's turned away. So once you block that, it means you cannot generate impulses and you cannot transmit impulses. So if there is a stimuli, whatever stimuli, be it pain, be it whatever, or temperature. So if there is a stimuli, that stimuli cannot be converted into an action potential and cannot even be transmitted. So this is why when you've got a patient who's paralyzed, that person, their whole leg can get bent and then they won't even know about it. The stimuli is there and the stimuli will keep damaging the foot, for instance, but there is no message that is carried to the brain to say, hey, you are burning, because there is no action potential that is generated and transmitted. So these local anesthetics, they come inside, they lock the channels from the inside. For some reason that I don't know, these local anesthetics cannot from the outside come and block the channel, the sodium channel gate, but they need to be inside to lock it from the inside. So once they've locked or they've blocked that sodium channel, sodium cannot get inside. So action potential cannot be generated and cannot be transmitted. And then now you can suture that patient. As you are suturing them with your sharp needle, the piercing in the skin is not going to be converted into an action potential and will not be transmitted to the brain and say, hey, someone is piercing you with a sharp needle. I hope that explains it. That's how local anesthetics work. So the important thing that we must remember here is that this is not in the literature. I've not seen it in the maybe it's there, but I've not seen it. If you don't want to forget the mechanism of action of your local anesthetics, just say they are sodium channel blockers. That's what they do. They block the sodium channels. Sodium channel blockers. Now, let's talk about the actual drugs. So, all the local anesthetics, this is how they work. All of them. And we said that you use local anesthetics for regional anesthesia, and we know the types of regional anesthesia, and for local. Now, let's talk about the classification and the actual drugs under each.